Hi, everyone. Welcome to Exploring Health, Macro to Micro. I'm your host, Parker Condit. In the show, I interview health and wellness experts around topics like sleep, exercise, nutrition, stress management, mental health, and much more. So by the end of each episode, you'll have concrete, tangible advice that you can start implementing today to start living a healthier life, either for yourself or for your loved ones. And that's the micro side of the show. The macro side of the show is discussing larger systemic issues that can be contributing to health outcomes. So an example of that is understanding that much of the traditional medical community treats the mind and body as separate entities, which leads to disconnected and disparate care. This is an idea that came up on today's show. And my guest today is Steven Jaggers. Steven is the founder of Somatic Breathwork, which is headquartered in Austin, Texas. He has an educational background in addiction therapy and physical therapy. So it's fitting that he operates in the breathwork space, since breath is the bodily function that bridges the mind and body so well. As you can probably guess, this episode is primarily focused on breathwork, and I think there's something in here for everyone. If this is your first introduction to breathwork, there's plenty in here that will be applicable and easy to implement right away. And if you're more familiar with breathwork, there are some deeper concepts that'll be fun to explore with Steven and I. We end up discussing a basic framework for how to use your breath to control your state, how emotions and trauma are stored in the body, the distinction about stress that most people misunderstand. He talks about how our nervous system is tied to communication, and we also go over an overview of what a somatic breathwork session entails. Steven is a leader and a great communicator in the breathwork space, and I've actually been following his work for a little over 5 years now, so I was truly excited to have him on as a guest to introduce this topic, which is probably not as mainstream as some of the other topics that I've had on this show. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy my conversation with Steven Jaggers. Steven, thanks so much for being here. We don't directly know each other, but we have a mutual friend in Paige Fleischman, who I used to work with when I was personal training. She was a client of yours and then probably subsequently a friend as well. But I'm really happy to have gotten connected and to have you on so we can chat today.
Yeah, it's an honor to be here, Parker. She was a client of mine. I was a client of hers, and it's we need a multitude of modalities, especially dealing with the world, the modern issues in our world. So, yeah, excited to be here, brother.
Yeah, so we're going to talk a lot about breath work and a variety of things in and around that realm. But I think I'd like to kind of frame the conversation around connection. And it feels like we're kind of in a strange transitional period right now where there's maybe a lack of community and a lack of connection. And partially this is due to the increase in technology, and the technology is awesome and what we've been able to achieve because of it. But there's also, there's two sides to every coin, right? So I feel like there's been a step away from sort of in-person connection and community and humanity, but it feels sort of like we're shifting back towards that, back towards a collective consciousness, awakening, whatever language you want to use around that. But it does feel like we're sort of shifting towards that and kind of moving in the right direction from a humanity standpoint. I'm curious. I just want to hear your thoughts on sort of where you think we are, to get your thoughts on kind of the current state of affairs.
Yeah, man. I'll tell you that I see a lot of like our in-person trainings, in-person events. People are so hungry for it. I think that connection and community, and even, I'm a big fan of kind of etymology in a way, like to commune is probably one of the biggest purposes for us being here. To communicate with each other, to be in connection with each other, to be in connection with ourselves. I mean, the thing that I'm the most fascinated in is, reconnecting our mind back to our body. That is the first step in sort of, healing anything, is to get your mind to communicate back to what's going on inside of your body. And that's the basis of actually being able to connect with other people too. There's a lot there. I think that we are hungry for in-person connection because that's how we're designed. I'm fascinated by the human nervous system, and not just its capacity to control our body, but also its capacity to communicate with other people and how that's an essential nutrient. There's a term called co-regulation that is maybe we can dive into. And it's an essential skill and nutrient that we actually need as humans, and especially in our developmental stages, that we become so disconnected that we're lacking like healthy nervous system co-regulation between people. And that's essentially the felt sense of being deeply connected to a tribe, to your friends, your family. And there's a multitude of different things around that we could dive into.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're already there. So let's just talk about that a little bit more. But I'm curious if I feel like there's been so much, there's very much online tribalism where people sort of get in these camps of thinking, and that can lead to sort of like online infighting, which probably isn't particularly helpful. But do those sort of online tribes and communities just give you like glimpses of that, like very short term, very low level doses of that co-regulation, where the in person is actually more like the real deal?
Man, to be honest, I come from a bodywork background, a practitioner background, where I'm working with people in a very physical way. And I was always against like online communities, and not necessarily against, but I negated how powerful they can actually be. And it's obviously not going to replace being together with another human, but I think the timing of everything for me was really fascinating because, I started like going into the breathwork stuff more and the somatics, and right around when COVID kind of was, popping off. And I hired a social media woman, and she was like, "Hey, you should showcase kind of what goes on in your sessions, and you should showcase someone like having an emotional release." And I actually was really against that. I thought that people wouldn't necessarily understand, and there's not enough context around what's actually going on, and people might just think it's like a cult or something. They don't understand the actual like benefits of it. And I ended up posting, this woman, I'm working with her, she's having an emotional release. And we started going viral from that, but not just in the United States. It was a global thing. And what blew my mind was we had thousands of messages come in overnight. And I would say probably 60% of those messages were not in English. And all of those messages, I'm sitting there on Google Translate, and I'm like, so many people are like, I don't even know what this is, but I need it. Like right now, I'm so disconnected and I'm so suppressed and I'm numb and I don't know what's going on, but I'm watching another person who's feeling, and I want to feel, because essentially feeling is equated to being alive. The opposite of feeling is numbness. And to me, I feel like that's the bigger epidemic that's going on, is this numbness, this parasitic tension that a lot of people are faced with.
It's interesting you share that, because I probably didn't know exactly what you did for a while. And I'm not sure if it was the video that you're talking about that went viral, but kind of one, you've shared quite a few of these of people having emotional releases. My first thought when I saw them was, that looks nice. That looks like something I would benefit from, not really knowing what it was, how you got there, what the modality was. So it's funny that was sort of a ubiquitous response to that first sort of viral post that you had.
Yeah. You talked about community and like communication, and, for me, just being so fascinated with the nervous system, I'm trying to figure out, okay, what is the primary function of it? Obviously, one of it is to like maintain safety, maintain homeostasis, to like send and receive messages from your central nervous system to your periphery to function your autonomic nervous system. But how is it doing that? It's doing that through communication. It is the communication system. And because it's communicating internally, but you're also communicating externally. And another thing that kind of blew my mind was, I posted a lot of stuff about me teaching and concepts and, just speaking, a lot of clips from my training. Whereas this was no words. This was only just watching someone, release emotion. And I'm like, why are all these people messaging us? It's because not everybody speaks English. Not everybody speaks my language, but everyone speaks emotions. Like if you're a human, like that is a level of communication that we all speak. It is a universal language. And so it's, emotions I consider like the connective tissue of our life. It pulls people together or it pushes people apart. So that was kind of another fascinating aspect of that as well.
Yeah, I think that demonstrates the point perfectly, where I didn't really know what was happening, and I don't even know that there was audio on it. Instagram, just audio is off to default. But I saw it and it just resonated with me. So it's just a very kind of ubiquitous human experience that you were sharing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think before we move on, maybe it's best to just give people some context around what exactly it is you do. And we'll kind of get into somatic breath work, and then we can kind of circle back to more of your background and take the conversation from there.
Yeah. So I don't know if it might be best to start like a little bit with my background.
Sure. Wherever you want to take this.
Yeah. So, I originally went to school for addiction psychology and also physical therapy. I couldn't decide which route I wanted to go, whether it was like I was fascinated by understanding how people's minds work. And, I grew up in a family of addicts, an only child, and I watched my parents struggle with addiction and, to hard drugs and also prescription medications. And there was a drive to understand that what causes a person to do that. And I also was very physically active. I played basketball. I was an amateur skateboarder. I did so many different things. So I was fascinated by both, and I couldn't decide which route I wanted to go down, because in our modern schooling, there is no kind of the connection in between them. So I ended up dropping out, and I found a holistic based school that taught different forms of body work, from, kind of the Western injury rehabilitation style body works, postural therapies. I became a neuromuscular therapist, really working on people's physical alignment. And then, that school also taught some of the energetic modalities and the somatic based modalities of like how the body stores emotion and, kind of equating the nervous system to the chakra system. And I was so fascinated by like, okay, if we strip it from its dogma, what's the essential thing that it's getting across? And so I became fascinated by that. I was a body worker for a long time, and I was an instructor and teacher at a school in Arizona. And at that time, I was fascinated by different psychedelics. I kind of went down that route for a little while. I volunteered for a nonprofit organization called MAPS, and they are, in getting into that realm, I was like, okay, if I want to explore this, I want to know how this is applied to our modern world and who's doing it in the best way possible. So I went down that route for a little bit, and it took me to, in 2017, I volunteered for their conference, and I had a friend say you should go to this holotropic breathwork session by a man named Stan Groff, who is kind of the father of most of these more powerful styles of breathwork. And I had a massive emotional release in this session. I was diagnosed with some thoracic scoliosis when I was about 17, and my parents were addicted to some pretty heavy stimulants. Your thoracic spine, from a like an Eastern standpoint, is like your fire center, and it controls like the adrenals and like people that are addicted to stimulants, you're burning out your fire in a way, or you're operating off of, whether it's stimulants, or you're operating off of a false sense of fire. And that was kind of the developmental thing that I think they passed down to me from doing so many drugs. And I felt, when I started getting into the breath work, I felt this pop in my thoracic spine. And, I'm kind of an anatomy nerd, and I'm like, okay, well, your diaphragm's actually connected to your lumbar spine, or it originates or whatever. But I felt this pop, and then I was just flooded with anger. Like, I had so much anger rush through me towards my parents, towards just the upbringing that I had, towards just being pissed off at life. And that came through me out of nowhere. And then after that, it was like waves of sadness and tears. And then it was like waves of actual just forgiveness for them doing the best that they could. And like, after I had this massive emotional release, and by that time I had tried so many different modalities, from EMDR to acupuncture to, all the bodywork stuff, to somatic psychotherapy. And I had that release of emotions, and I just became so clear mentally that, okay, as a body worker or a trainer, I'm actually a breath worker first, because if I'm not attuning to someone's breath, then whatever they're doing, their nervous system's in a contracted state. If someone's holding their breath, then whatever I'm doing is probably not landing, whether I'm doing actual physical tissue manipulation or if I'm guiding someone through an exercise. If they're holding their breath, it's probably not a beneficial thing. So I'm like, okay, let's study all the different types of breath work, and went down that journey of studying, a lot of the upregulating styles of breath work to the downregulating styles. And, there's dogma in those, like which ones you should only breathe through your nose or only breathe through your mouth, or, they all have benefits for different things. And I think I take that lens of, let's strip it of the dogma and see, okay, what's the intention of this? And so I started utilizing like a few different styles of breath work in my bodywork sessions, combined with some, guided verbal cues and processing. And I had a woman who was a therapist, who asked me if I could start to teach her kind of what I was doing with her. And at that point, I knew how to make a curriculum, and I just kind of slapped something together and held a little training out of my house and hit up my clients and was like, hey, do you want to learn about this? And now, it hasn't even been that long. 3 years later, we have over 1,000 practitioners worldwide, and we're fully accredited, and it's grown tremendously. So that's kind of the background story, and we can get into any of the specifics on there if you want.
Yeah, there's so many interesting threads, but right before we started recording, you were talking about the recent accreditation from ASU and sort of building a curriculum. So I'd love to just hear more about what exactly the accreditation is through ASU, just for people who are curious, and then just to hear a little bit more about the specific practitioner training that you take people through.
Yeah. So as far as the accreditation, it is for continuing education credits for practitioners. Now, practitioner is definitely a broad statement. It's a vague statement. Depending if you are, if you're, a massage therapist, or you're a chiropractor, or you're an actual like psychotherapist, most licensures require you to have continuing education, ongoing continuing education every 2 years or something like that, which you have a certain amount that you can have general CEUs, which allows you to study a multitude of different things. And a lot of the times they require specific CEUs depending on your license. So right now we are accredited for general CEUs from anybody who is a therapist to a physical therapist. I get a lot of people that come from the mind side of things, like therapists and coaches and counselors. And I get a lot of people that come from the body side of things, personal trainers, chiropractors, physical therapists, because, breath work is essentially working with the nervous system, and it is the bridge between the mind and body. So from a marketing standpoint, it's been hard to niche myself. But it's really cool to be that kind of centerpiece in between.
Certainly, breathwork is so interesting because it's one of the only functions in the body where it happens consciously and subconsciously. Where luckily, we don't have to be paying attention to our breath, and we'll just keep doing it. It's a very fun, it's a clever evolutionary trait that we got. But we can also control it too, and that's like the bridge that you're talking about, where it can be this such a powerful tool for us to use our breath to tap into these different states within the body. And I think people don't understand what a powerful tool it is and possibly leverage it as much, because it really can be almost a superpower if you can really harness it in a particular way.
Yeah, we're not taught that from a young age, that you can control your state based on how you're breathing. We can't always control the external world, and we can't always control what's going on outside of us, but you can control your internal state. And when you look at trauma, or if you look at stress, would you just take stress, for example, like what's stressful to you might not be stressful to me based on my level of resilience. And so trauma and stress are a subjective thing. And based on an organism's like ability to regulate itself when they're going through something. And so, yeah, utilizing your breath, which we can get into all like the basic rules within that. It's not something that we're taught, but it's something that we're doing all the time. That seems, it seems like just so simple, but it can have profound effects. And to be honest, my mind is always blown when I'm working with people. I'm like, I don't know if they're getting anything from it, but people have some pretty life transforming awarenesses, which, this wasn't really the thing that I thought I'd be going into, but it has kind of chose me in a way, and it continuously blows my mind.
Yeah, it is interesting how it's something so benign. And I think it is because it feels like a very passive thing, and it can be overlooked. Like, one of the things I harp on the most with people is how important walking is, but it seems like such a low threshold activity where you see all the high intensity stuff, especially in the fitness world. You think, how effective can walking really be? And walking, I think, is also a superpower if you really harness it. But breath work in the same vein, where it seems so simple. You're like, I do it all day. How much of a difference can it really make? And you've seen clearly the power of it and how positively influential it can be.
Yeah, I'll say one other piece within that is that, like, I have a lot of people that ask me what's the best breath work practice that I can do on a daily basis, like what Kundalini exercise or what, oxygen advantage technique or whatever it is, what thing can I do on a day-to-day basis? That's the best like daily practice. Well, you're not what you do sometimes, you are what you do all the time. And like you said, your breath is something that you're either aware of or you're not. It's conscious or unconscious or subconscious. And so it's not about what you do once a day. It's about, like, can you be aware of your breath for for most of your day, right? When you're in an argument with your spouse, when you are in the line at the grocery store, it's like doing an hour of yoga or doing an hour personal training session. Well, if you're not aware of your body the rest of the day and you're sitting all day, it's not really going to do a lot for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's helpful to have that practice, but the practice should then sort of expand into the rest of your conscious day, hopefully. Yeah. So you were talking about a variety of different breathwork protocols, upregulating, downregulating. Have you distilled sort of the first principles out of those? And if you have, can you share kind of what those are and what you gravitate towards now from a teaching perspective?
Yeah. This is a fascinating topic that I would love to hear your perspective on it too. I think as a body worker, first, I kind of came up against this limitation of being taught that if someone has tension in their body, that like my job is like, let's just go release it. Let's go work on it. Let's physically like manually try to, someone has a knot or a trigger point. Let's go try to like get it out of them. And then at the same time, I'm like, well, if the body is so intelligent, why is it creating that there to begin with? And, then I started studying like FRC and like some other activation stuff, and so I'm like, well, maybe they actually need strength there. Maybe they actually need to turn that part of their system on. Maybe they actually aren't even able to occupy that part of their body. And so for me, it's always this balance of you need to be able to turn things on, and you also need to be able to turn things off. Not everything needs to be released. Sometimes things need to be activated. Sometimes when you activate something, then it can relax a lot more. And so I take this very dualistic approach to almost everything because we live in a duality. We need both sides. When you look at the nervous system, and specifically the autonomic nervous system, like we have these states of parasympathetic rest and digest. We have these states of sympathetic, go, do all the time. Both are necessary. Now, you might just be stuck in one of those states and having a hard time going, like transitioning to the other. And that's where issues are. So when it comes to the breathwork side of things, I kind of took that similar principle, as in most of the sessions that I do, I work on, like I take someone through this journey of let's actually spike their nervous system. Let's take them into a stressful state. And, there's a term called hormetic stress. It's very similar to like what Wim Hof stuff is based off of. Like, let's put the body into a state of stress and then show it how to come back down into a relaxed state. And so I usually spend half the time upregulating, taking someone's system into a state of stress. And we can talk about how that actually can bring up like unprocessed emotions for people. And then I spend the second half of the time helping people retrain their nervous system to, when I get into a state of stress, I know how to come back down into a regulated state. And there's other parts of that, but I had a mentor once tell me that health is the ability to choose. And for me, that has always resonated. You need to be able to turn things on, and you need to be able to have passion and fire and like, activate yourself and go perform all the necessary physical activities. And then you also need to be able to shut it off and relax, and you need both sides. And so I take a very balanced approach of utilizing both. And for me, I can always relax so much more if I've pushed myself physically. So, what goes up must come down. And there's a multitude of other aspects within that, but on a basic like physiological level, that's kind of the process that I take people through.
Yeah. So just to share sort of a concrete example of that, I also, like you mentioned stress a few times, and I always feel the need to clarify for people that stress is not necessarily a bad thing. Stress is required for adaptation. I always use exercise as the example. You're stressing a particular tissue or your cardiovascular system, and the goal is to get your body to freak out a little bit because it was hard. And then your body doesn't want to be freaked out like that. So it adapts. So the next time you provide that level of stimulus, that level of stress, you've adapted. So your body doesn't freak out as much. And that's sort of the idea of progressive overload in personal training. So stress is not necessarily a bad thing, but constantly being stressed, kind of as you were saying, being up or down, fine. It's great that you have both, but sort of being stuck in one area is not ideal. But the idea of kind of doing that up to down would be like a strength training session or like some sort of exercise session. That's your up. That's the stress. That's sort of mobilizing a lot of stuff within your body, adrenaline, cortisol, stress hormones. But that's great. You want that sort of energy. If you're being chased by a bear, you want to mobilize as much energy as possible. But then afterwards, what I taught people the simplest way to do it is just to sit and focus on your breath for like 5 minutes afterwards. Probably not in a gym because it's harder to do, it's harder to control the environment there. But if you can find like a calm place, maybe somewhere dark, and you just close your eyes, and there's not even a particular protocol to give them, be like, just be with your breath for 5 minutes. And that's trying to teach them to then go down afterwards. So that's just, if people are sort of listening and you're like, I don't have a clear example of what this sort of up and down is. There's a lot of talk about breath work. Hopefully that's a concrete example of how you can integrate that from something that a lot of people listening are probably going to be familiar with.
Yeah. And there's one kind of basic rule that, is really simple that will help people with that, is that if you are elongating your exhales, you're naturally going to take yourself into a parasympathetic state or a state of rest. You're naturally going to start to calm yourself down. If you start to elongate your inhalations, well, you're going to start to activate your system, and you're going to start to like take yourself into an activated state. I don't want to say stress state. But that's a very basic rule to, change your state depending on where you're trying to go.
Yep. Yeah. It's so easy to get lost in the weeds of this protocol, this type of breathing. So yeah, I love that you gave that example and that very basic rule. Longer exhales if you want to relax or down regulate, elongated inhales if you want to upregulate.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, how like stress or trauma can sort of be stored in the body, and how certain upregulating breathing can sort of release that. Could you speak more to that? Because I'm very unfamiliar with sort of the nuance and the mechanism of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm fascinated by it. And that's, so the thing that a lot of people don't realize, especially as breath work is gaining popularity, is that when you are breathing heavily for an extended period of time, you're mimicking a state of distress, or you're mimicking a trauma state on a physiological level. Like if I was being chased by a tiger, how would I be breathing? It'd be like,
yeah.
So, a lot of people say that you're hyperoxygenating the system, or there's some metaphysical aspects behind it, but what you're doing is you're really just mimicking a state of trauma within that. And you're sending yourself into this activated state, which there are benefits to that. And the benefits of that is that in a safe like session, in a safe container, if you will, and you have a practitioner that's trained and knows how to guide you, you can take someone's physiology into that state. And what happens is a lot of the time you're mimicking this stress state, you're mimicking a trauma response. Nothing's necessarily happening to you in your head, right? But on a physiological state, you're mimicking it. And so in the safe container, a lot of the times people's unprocessed emotions will come back up, because when we go through something stressful or traumatic in our normal life, our society has taught us to like suck it up and don't show it, and like just kind of get stuck in this inhalation sympathetic fight or flight response, and then go to a therapist and work through the story mentally. Well, you can work through the story mentally as much as you want, but if your body is still stuck in that state, there's not a lot you're going to be able to do. And so what's going on in those upregulating breathwork styles is you're mimicking a state of distress, which gives your organism an opportunity to discharge. Now, this discharge, if you will, and if people want to learn more about this, you can go read like Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine, or The Body Keeps the Score by Vessel van der Kolk. If you look at animals, when they go through something stressful or traumatic, they have a certain process response that they go through afterwards, and it's considered a discharge. Usually there'll be some sort of shaking. Maybe there's sound involved, deep belly breathing. And I consider a discharge as like, it could be an emotional release. It could be crying, yelling, screaming, could be laughing, could be singing, could be moving your body in ways you haven't let yourself move. What's going on is this discharge is completing the necessary action that your physical body needed to do in the moment of that stressor, but never had the opportunity to do it. And why that's powerful is that when you have this discharge, it's a signal to your nervous system that the threat has been completed and we can go back into a relaxed state. And so that's why you get people that are stuck in these chronic states of fight or flight, because they never actually had an opportunity to discharge, to like feel their emotions, to shake and cry and yell and scream and hit a pillow as hard as they can. And if you look at a child, like one of my favorite quotes in the Bible is like, unless you become as a child, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. And it's like, you look at children, they're so much more connected to the innate intelligence of their body that when something stressful goes on, they immediately start having a temper tantrum because they know that if they don't move it through them in some sort of way, then it's going to be harbored and held in the body. And then eventually it's going to bottle up and like it's eventually going to come out somewhere. And there you get, like, one of my favorite examples is like passive aggressiveness. Well, emotions they're designed to move through us. And usually in a healthy person, an emotion takes about 90 seconds to move through you. Like if you have a hard cry and you let yourself cry, like you just let it out, usually it's only going to take about 90 seconds and then you're going to be like, all right, I feel a lot better. But for some people, it takes 20 years because they just don't know how to do it, right? Or if it's anger, you never allowed yourself to actually feel anger. And anger is like every human, it's a byproduct of being human. We experience anger, but it's a very scary thing in our culture. If you bottle it up, like that anger wants to go somewhere and it'll find very sneaky ways to come out, such as the people that you're around, your closest relationships, this passive aggressiveness where it just starts leaking out on all the people around you. And so I look at this modality as almost like a preventative health, where it's like you're able to prevent so that you're not venting on other people. There's one aspect of that, and there's a multitude of other things. But does that make sense? Did I put that in a...
Yeah, totally. I just keep coming back to the more and more you speak, I keep going back to your, like what you end up studying in school, how you had the mental side and the physical side. So the addiction therapy and the physical therapy. And it seems like so many of the conversations I have on this show are around healthcare and the medical community and the disconnection or the siloing of, even just within the medical world, the siloing of a primary care from an endocrinologist, from an OBGYN. I feel like that is just driving so many of the issues, at least from like just the medical community, with how hard it is to communicate and how we treat the body as if it's not connected. So I think a lot of what you are talking about and what you've been able to do so successfully is bridging the mental and the physical. And it just seems like at least in America, in our society, this concept is being touted as revolutionary and progressive. And, like a lot of the rest of the world has figured this out like thousands of years ago.
Right.
Like the thing that's on top of our head is connected to the rest of the body as well. You figured there would be some sort of overlap.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I think that was a really good explanation of kind of understanding how that sort of upregulation, that sort of energetic stimulus can be used as a therapeutic avenue for people to teach themselves how to work through something. And I've never heard that an emotion can be kind of worked through in 90 seconds before. And you gave the comparison of compared to like 20 years. I was going to say, yeah, people hold on to these things like for a lifetime when it's something that you could work through rather quickly. And like, let's be clear, I'm certainly one of those people too, where I need to get closer to that 90-second spectrum.
I mean, yeah, that's most of us. I'm really fascinated by, Gabor Mate is another guy that I kind of study in his new book, The Myth of Normal. And, most of our issues are a very normal response to an abnormal environment. And I like most of our trauma responses, or most of our inability to be connected to our emotions and our body, is because of the environment that we grew up in. And I almost equate that to like sitting in a chair. Well, most of the responses and the issues inside of my body from sitting in a chair, it's a very normal response to an abnormal environment. The tension in my hips is a normal response to an abnormal environment because my body didn't adapt to sit in a chair. So I'm going to have these normal pathological issues. So there's the environmental aspect. And, to your point, the only reason why this modality is growing is, in my opinion, is because we've weeded out a lot of the natural ways that we discharge in our culture. You look at, indigenous cultures that like they would sing and dance and shake and cry and yell and scream and around a fire all together, like all like this full expression of just getting it and moving it out of your body together. And it like none of it's bad or good. It's like, let's just all move it through us. And we've definitely, weeded out a lot of those ceremonial practices that help us to move that through. And I'll just say one other thing on that is that, like the upregulation part of this breath work, it's powerful for emotional release. It's powerful for this discharging, which has benefits, but it's also just as necessary. And I see a lot of breathwork techniques that are in this same field of kind of emotional release. And because there's other breathworks that are in like sports performance, and that's a completely different thing. But it's just as important to now, okay, we had this emotional release, we had this discharge. Let's bring it back down to a relaxed state. Let's start to showcase the nervous system how to come back down, utilizing elongated exhales. And I'll say one other piece on that. And let's start to fire and wire elevated emotions within that. Because it's never about the release, it's about the space that you created to then bring in how you want to feel, how you want to show up. And this is based off of a lot of Joe Dispenza's stuff, which he has plenty of research on what the benefits of like creating elevated emotions and firing and wiring elevated emotions back into the body while taking the nervous system into a relaxed state is incredibly powerful.
Is that the idea that there's just going to be, if you've had sort of this very strong negative emotion for a while and you sort of clear that, there's going to be a void? So you're just being very deliberate about what you're sort of replacing. I don't know if replacing is the right word. I don't always have the right language for this, but.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. Most people's identities are associated with their stressors and their traumas. And so when you start to like move that through and like deactivate that, because essentially nothing's ever released. I think that word is probably misused in a way, because it's really like we're deactivating these natural responses such as fight, flight, freeze, fawn, which are helpful, but if they're left activated chronically, they become the thing that causes issues. So when that's deactivated, people's identities are often like so intertwined with their trauma that they don't know who they are. But there's this space that is like, okay, let's actually now start to like tune into, well, how do I want to feel and who do I want to become? Because I've seen it a lot of the times with these powerful breathwork modalities where people have this powerful release and then they're kind of just like in this void space of not knowing who they are. And, they're probably still in the dysregulation of it too. But it's just, my point being is that we need to make sure we're doing the other side as well. And there's concepts in I think it's positive psychology as well that showcase, like, once you have someone go into their negative story, that we actually need to have something to replace it and to anchor this person into the opposing side. And it just kind of follows that duality model of everything that I base things off of.
Yeah. So this is something I was going to ask more about, like the specifics of sort of your teachings, but it seems applicable here. Where is there, like, do you encourage people to do this in a sort of coached setting? Because you can just go on YouTube and look up a variety of breathwork protocols and you can just do it in your room, right? And it's probably like anything where there should be certain intentionality behind whatever you're doing that's going to make it much more powerful. But do you have suggestions around maybe the environment that somebody should get introduced to this in, whether it be in a group setting, in a coach setting, having some sort of instructor, or just having the right intentionality, doing it on your own? Can that be appropriate in some situations?
No, this is a great question. There's benefits to both. I would say when it comes to like the modality that I teach, somatic breath work, it is done with a practitioner. And there's certain reasons why. Self practices are powerful, like Wim Hof. Some of these shorter breathwork practices are great for, you can go and do a YouTube video, but the longer breathwork style journeys, I would kind of categorize them as, there's benefits to having someone guide you, because most of our stressors, our traumas are actually come from another person. Like, most of our stuff happened in relation to our parents, in relation to, other people. Most of our wounding happens from other people. And one of my favorite quotes in Body Keeps the Score is, healing happens in the presence of an empathetic witness. And so it's actually having another person there for you.
That's a great line.
What'd you say?
That's a great line.
Healing happens in the presence of an empathetic witness, man. And I'll give just an example of this is, like, you can, spend a lot of alone time and feel so enlightened and feel like so, solid in yourself. Go try to get into a relationship. And that's going to bring up all your triggers, all your wounds, because it's stored in the body, but it doesn't get activated until you have someone else there to trigger it. And so the repatterning of it is incredibly powerful, to have another person there to actually witness you in that. And that speaks to the first thing that you brought up in this conversation is community, is communion. We all want to feel like we are seen and heard, and beyond seen and heard, we all want to feel like we're felt by other people, that we're understood, that we're like in this together, that, hey, I'm bringing something to the table for my tribe, and it's helping you and you're helping me. It's an essential thing that we're wanting. And I have seen it's just so much more powerful to have another person there for you. And there's a multitude of reasons there. I'll give one example. Because I'm a body worker, I do add a lot of hands-on touch aspects of this, which is not always necessary in a breathwork session, but it can be really powerful. And there's a lot of amazing ways that you can work with somebody physically in that. And I always, obviously ask for consent. This style of breathwork is an inward journey. So I ask for consent if someone's, okay with me physically working on them during the session. And I was working with a woman, and I also say within that at any time during the session that you feel like I'm kind of taking you out of your state, or it's not benefiting you in any way, like, feel free to just kind of push me away. Like, I don't fully know where they're at. I can attune to them, but I don't fully know where they're at. And I went to work on this woman, and she, I'm like getting down to like do a physical technique with her, and she just throws me off of her. And in my head, I'm like, oh shit, did I do something wrong? Like, oh God, uh-oh, I did something wrong. And she shared at the end that that was one of the most powerful things that I've ever gone through, because that was the first time I've ever said no to a man and he's actually listened to me. And so, like, if we're like, I basically played the part of being able to help her repattern feeling safe to say no, and having a masculine figure that's going to actually honor that for her, and her nervous system feeling safe in that context. Like, that's an example of repatterning within that. So that's an example of how having a practitioner there can bring up different relational dynamics that make it very interesting.
I'm sure interesting is a good word for it. I had down here a note about fear. I'm not sure if that's the right question or the right word, but maybe, do people need to know what exactly, like, I don't want to say issue, but like what they're hurting from before going through this? Or can they just have some sort of ambiguous pain that they know, where maybe they're not targeting something specifically, but they just know, right? They have some sort of underlying depression or just darkness within them that they want to try to address.
Yeah, this is a great question as well. I always tell people not to. It's better not to, because we can try to get caught up in the mind and, the story. A lot of the times it's not about the story of what happened. And that's why this is somatic breath work, because it's just giving someone's organism an opportunity to complete whatever necessary action it needed to do. And a lot of the times we don't know in our head. We don't always know what our physical body needed to do, because we have evolved from this bottom up. Our nervous system and our being operates from a bottom up perspective, meaning that when something stressful happens, we immediately have an instinctual response. If someone breaks into your house right now, you're not going to be thinking about it. You're either going to run towards them, you're going to run away from them, or you're going to freeze where you're at. And that's happening like that because of your survival. It's not happening in your mind. Then you're going to have an emotional response. You're going to feel a ton of fear. Maybe you feel a ton of courage. And that's your body's getting pumped full of, a chemical concoction of glandular secretions. And, you're feeling a lot of emotions at that point. And only lastly does the mind come in and create a perception. And that perception is usually based on what happened and what patterns you chose on an instinctual and an emotional level. So I'll give you an example. Say someone did break into your house. You had this instinctual response to, run away, and you felt a ton of fear. You made it to safety, and then you called the police and they came and arrested this person. Only after that whole scenario went down, your mind will start to create a story that, oh shit, I'm not safe in my house anymore, or I'm not safe in the world anymore. And now that story is going to be the perception that you're moving through into the world with. But we have to address things on both sides. Like, that's why this part is powerful, is because we actually need to allow someone to complete the necessary action on an instinctual level, on an emotional level. And a lot of times that will provide space for a new perspective to happen. Another example that I'll give is, speaking about like the current state of affairs in the world, the governments, the institutions that have been in power for a long time, religions, they understand that if I can keep you in a state of fear or guilt or shame, you're going to be operating like instinctually. You're going to be operating emotionally. You're probably going to run to the store and buy all the toilet paper. Like, that has anything to do with your social survival or your survival whatsoever. You're not going to be thinking clearly. And so a lot of times it's like, let's just help people move through the physical aspect and the emotional aspect. And when you clear that, a lot of times you become clear. If your body is stuck in a state of fear and contraction, you're going to be picking up on contracted ideas. And this might be a little woo-woo for your audience, but they haven't necessarily figured out, okay, where does mind happen inside of your body? Does it happen between your ears? And a technology such as yoga has understood this for a long time, is let's actually put the body in different positions, because your nervous system is an antenna, and based on the state of that antenna is going to be what you're actually picking up on mentally. If your body is stuck in a state of fear, you're going to be picking up on fear-centered ideas. If you're dysregulated and you're stressed, well, your mind is probably going to tend towards stressed thoughts. And so I'm focused on working with the body first, and then let's see what type of space that actually creates and changes the mindset that you're inhabiting. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I appreciate you sharing that, because I've wanted to be able to talk about these things, but I don't think I'm the most skilled communicator at this yet. And I wanted to be very particular about the first person I brought on to communicate some of these concepts. And I know you're such a good communicator about these. So I'm glad we ended up getting there to that point. But that's sort of touching on the idea of like law of attraction, right?
Expand upon that a little bit.
How you were saying the body is sort of an antenna, like the type of energy you're holding inside is kind of what you're going to attract and be attuned to.
I mean, definitely. Like when you are, if people, there's, especially in the spiritual community, there's a lot of, like, let's expand our consciousness. Let's connect spiritually. But, all of that has to be done through actually feeling expansive and feeling safe in your body. Like for me, I had someone ask me, do you believe that there's some sort of spiritual war going on, or like attack on our souls or something like that? And I'm like, I don't get too far into that. But I do believe that there is actually kind of a war going on against our body. You look at the very predatory marketing that's done towards women, makeup and breast implants, and, your body's got to look this way, or, you're not going to find a mate. Same with men. Like, you got to be successful. You got to like take steroids, all these different things, that the poison in our food. Like, there is a war against our body, because our body is where we have any sort of experience of every experience of love, every experience of, every spiritual experience I've ever had, every experience of pain, every experience of joy has been through my body. Because the body essentially is the temple, and the temple is where you connect to something that's greater than yourself, right? God, source, spirit. And so if your body's in pain, it's going to be really hard for you to connect. And that's why I'm just focused on, like, let's get the body in the best operating place it can be, from a fitness, a physical fitness side of things, an emotional fitness side of things, nutrition side of things. And then, for me, I struggled. I didn't necessarily struggle with a lot of mental stuff, but anytime I was struggling mentally, I would just go do something to get myself in my body. I was, growing up, I was always the kid outside playing and running and playing sports and skateboarding. And I played basketball through high school, and I played in college for a little bit. And I wondered why I was so, like, why I love that so much. And, when you're in your body and you're doing something physical like that, you're not thinking about what's going on in the past. You're not thinking about what's going on in the future. You're engulfed by the moment in time. And to me, that's the most spiritual experience someone can have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's amazing how much physiology can affect psychology, and psychology can affect physiology. Just going back to the idea that both speak to each other so much.
Yeah.
Can you? Maybe we should have done this earlier, but can you explain what somatic is?
Yeah, somatic is, there's a couple different understandings of it. The the Western understanding of somatics, and Peter Levine is kind of the father of modern day somatics. The definition of somatic is of the body in relation to the mind. So the field of somatics is basically like how the state of your body is affecting the state of your mind. And it is this bottom up process. So it's looking at the body and how it's affecting the mind versus modern psychotherapy has a top down approach to things. It's like, let's look at the mind and see how it's affecting your body, which there are pros and cons to both of those, and they're both necessary. But for me, like the pendulum needed to swing to the other side because we've been such a mentally dominant culture, and we've forgotten the intelligence in our body. There's more intelligence in my body than my mind can ever even fathom. Like, try to wrap your head around digesting your food and absorbing and assimilating your nutrients and growing this hair on my face. Like, to me, to try to wrap my head around that mentally, like my mind can't even do that. And so I've always swung the pendulum to, let's attune to the intelligence of the body and then connect to the mind. But the other, like the root word of somatic is from a Greek origin. It means soma, which they looked at soma as it's your living wholeness. They didn't separate like mind, body, spirit. It like is your soma. It's it's considered your living wholeness, and it's all connected, and they're all affecting each other at the same time.
I think that's a really nice way to think of it. Your living wholeness.
Yeah.
I think I need to jot that down on a sticky note and keep it on my computer.
Yeah.
So when you were talking earlier about sort of shorter duration breathwork protocols that you can probably just do on YouTube by yourself, and then you were saying longer breathwork journeys, how long is like a session that you would take somebody through?
Yeah, a typical somatic breathwork session is usually done for about an hour. It's an hour-long session. There's ways to make it short. You can condense it and do like a 30-minute session, or you could make it longer into a 90-minute session. Traditional like holotropic breathwork, which is probably the most well-studied modality when it comes to these longer breathwork journey style modalities, that's typically done for 3 hours long, and it's upregulating the whole time, and it's really intense. And essentially what you're doing is you're creating an NDE, which means a near-death experience. You're like mimicking you're pushing that state of physiological stress and reenactment of trauma to the point of like, I'm having an NDE and I'm probably going to have some sort of psychedelic or spiritual experience from that, which is definitely unnecessary and, in my opinion, too much for the general population. That's why I kind of condensed it, and we have rounds of breath holds where we're balancing CO2 to O2 ratio and kind of making sure people don't get like too much respiratory alkalosis. And so typically a somatic breathwork session is an hour long. There's 30 minutes of upregulating, 30 minutes of downregulating with some breath holds in between. And as far as the daily practice goes, for me, I like to stay pretty balanced. I'll do like 3 minutes of upregulating, deep inhales and exhales out of my mouth where I am taking myself into a stress state. I'll do a breath hold, kind of at the top, an inhale hold. And then I will switch to breathing in through the nose and elongating my exhales for another 3 minutes. And then I'll do a breath hold at the bottom and just really try to, and a lot of times that'll take me into quite a meditative state, and maybe I'll meditate for a little bit. It actually has helped my meditation practice as well, because I definitely had like probably most people in the West have a hard time meditating. But it's a lot easier if you take yourself up and then bring yourself back down.
That actually makes sense. Yeah. One of my complaints for many years about doing silent meditations was my mind is so busy. So yeah, it would make sense that if you take yourself up first, you can probably get yourself to a quieter mind state on the other side of it. Going back to the somatic breath work, do you do Any sort of like pre-ceremony rituals? Is there music in the background? Are people lying down? Are they seated? I'm just kind of curious about the
Yeah.
logistics of one of these sessions.
Yeah, absolutely. For the longer session, people are lying down. Typically, if you're doing anything over like 5 to 7 minutes, unless you have a lot of experience with breath work, you usually want to be laying down because you can, like, I've gotten lightheaded from Wim Hof and, kind of fell off balance. So usually you want to be laying down. As far as it really depends because there's a multitude of different ways you can do it. You can do a one-on-one session with a practitioner, or there's group sessions, which there's pros and cons to each of those. There are a little bit different. Typically, there's guided instruction in the beginning, and there's instruction on not to eat a bunch of food right before you do it, and wear comfortable clothing. And there are people that take a much more ceremonial approach to things. I think I have just throughout this process, I've tried to strip it of as much as possible just to make it appeal to the general population. Because that's for me, like, I do have a very spiritual and ceremonial background. Like I love that. I nerd out on all that stuff. But if I'm trying to take this to the masses, I want to definitely make it as simple and just neutral as possible.
Mm-hmm. While you're going through the breath work, is there music playing?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Music is a big part of it. And that's, music is huge. I mean, sound is very interesting because sound bypasses all of your defense system and goes straight to your brainstem. And it's like if someone's playing shitty music, whatever you think shitty music is, in the car, there's not a lot you can do besides like try to plug your ears, right? It's going straight to your brainstem. And so it has more of an effect on people than anything that I can say or do as a practitioner. So music is definitely a huge portion of it. It's really important. And especially as you're going through the journey, like the curation of the music is really important to it as well.
Yeah, I can imagine that would really help enhance or possibly detract if the music is not probably aligning with
Definitely.
what that part of the session is supposed to be.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you give people certain integration protocols or techniques to work through after a session or between sessions?
Yeah, this is an interesting topic. It depends on what your definition of integration is, right? We like one of the things that I love to do is just define words. Socrates is like wisdom begins at the definition of terms. And so I look at somatic breathwork as an integration modality. It's an internal integration modality because what's going on is you are connecting to parts of yourself that you have been disconnected from, whether that's emotions that you've pushed down, whether that's parts of your body. Like I would look at different types of personal training as an integration modality. From the field of somatics, integration and healing actually mean the same thing. Like if trauma is a disconnect from myself or parts of myself, then all healing is an integration. And so like during the session, there's this internal integration that's happening where I'm reconnecting to parts of myself. And then what I think you're talking about is like the external integration is like, okay, now how do I take that internally integrated part of myself and now integrate that externally? Well, the biggest, when it comes to external integration, I mean, there are a lot of different ways that you can do that. And, there's journaling, there's, repeated exercises and small practices, there's accountability. But at the end of the day, nobody can externally integrate for you. Like you have to do that for yourself. And so, but what I will say is that the biggest factor in external integration is your community, is the people that you're surrounded yourself with. Do you have a group of people that you can go and become this new version of yourself that they're going to hold you accountable for that? And do they actually allow you to become a new version of yourself? Because the biggest thing that I get is people have these life-changing, profound experiences, and then they're like, oh shit, how do I go back home and like be with my wife and kids and go back to my daily routines or my work and my job, where most people are stuck in kind of a fight or flight state or a stress state. Like the more we're stuck in a chronic stress state, the more that we crave stasis, meaning that we want everyone around us to be the same person now as they're going to be tomorrow, as they're going to be the next day. And so the more like at capacity and overwhelm that I am in, the more I'm going to be like, okay, I just need things to be the same around me as much as possible. And we start to put that on people around us. And what that does is that eliminates the space for them to become a new person and to like become this person that went through this internally integrated, experience, which the thing about somatic is, yeah, you might be connecting to emotions and parts of yourself that you've pushed down for a long time that could be a little scary and maybe parts of your shadow. But at the same time, you're probably connecting to a lot of your strengths, a lot of the ways in which you could be showing up better in the world, your potential. I utilize it for like a self-development modality as well, to really connect to, okay, how do I want to show up in the world? What do I want to become? And like, how powerful am I? And sometimes that's uncomfortable for people, but then, taking that connected part of myself and now having a community, having people that allow me to become this new connected version of myself is the most important part of it. And it goes back to your first question: is community is the most essential nutrient in all of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you brought up a great point, how important environment is, how you can have a really profound experience, but like you said, the environment that you're going back to is going to be very influential as well. I do want to be respectful of your time, so I want to start wrapping this up, but I just want to ask you quickly, just sort of from like a very meta perspective, like where do you see the world of mental health care and healthcare in general going in the future? Because you mentioned psychedelics really early on in the conversation, and that's kind of getting a bit of a tailwind for its use, its therapeutic use. It does seem like there's a shift towards people acknowledging that the mind and body are connected, which is great within like more traditional healthcare settings. I'm just curious where you see maybe the mental health care space over the next 10 or 20 years evolving. Yeah.
Well, where I see it going and where I'd like it to go might, like, I hope it's the same route. I do think that we've been in a place of mental health being a specialized field. And essentially my goal and my wish is to showcase how connected they are. And instead of it being mental health, it's mind body health, and how, your physical body is affecting your mind and how your mind's affecting your physical body. And I think this is another bigger topic, but like what I'm really fascinated in as the world continues to move faster and as AI is like just growing at an exponential rate, and how we're still operating in these biological vessels that are really actually ancient. Like, you're not your physical age. You are actually very ancient, because it's taken thousands and thousands of years for you to develop a lot of the patterns that are embedded in your nervous system.
Yeah, to get this version of me.
Yeah, that didn't come from you. That came from thousands of versions of evolution and processing and learning new adaptive patterns. And so we have this ancient biology, we have this godlike technology, and we have medieval institutions. Like, there's some quote around that, but it lands for me. I think that the ideal place, and hopefully, and I do see us going this way, is figuring out how biology and technology can live symbiotically, because that's the only route. Like, technology is growing. We're still in a biological vessel, and we have to find some way for it to integrate in a healthy way. And so I think um, there's two kind of ways to look at it. We've come from a specialized sort of healthcare where you got the mental health person, you got the gastroenterologist, you got the the neurosurgeon, and then you have like the holistic perspective of things and people that are looking at the whole picture. And both of them are necessary, and none of them are bad or good, because we need specialists and we also need generalists. And hopefully we figure out a way to kind of merge them together, and because there's pros and cons to both sides, but we need both sides.
Yeah, very much so. Do you have any closing thoughts before we wrap this up?
Yeah. Closing thoughts. Yeah, I think we, as a human, and in humanity, we are definitely faced with kind of a choice right now, and that, as you could tell through most of my spiels, I operate dualistically, and we have a choice between sort of fear or love, or openness or contractedness, and we actually have the tools to change our state at any point in time, and that is your breath. You can take yourself into more of a contracted state and close yourself off and, lock your doors and buy guns and all of those things. Or you can choose to be in more of an open, connected state, more of an integrated state. And that is done through your breath. And the last thing I'll say is that, I get a lot of people that look at the videos and have a different response than you did. They're like, this looks scary. I don't want to do this. And I'm like, well, if you're afraid of your breath, then you are afraid of your life. And maybe sitting down with yourself, breathing for an hour might be the scariest thing that you could do. And, but if you're afraid of that, you're afraid of your life, because your life is measured by breath. We all took our first breath, and at some point in time, we're all going to take our last, and in between is our life, and we get to choose what state we're in.
That seems like a very eloquent way to wrap this up. Steven, thank you so much for coming on. It's been really fun chatting with you. I think this has been a very different type of episode for our listeners, and I think it's a very good introduction to probably a lot of new concepts for people, but I really appreciate how well you've been able to communicate them, and how I think you're gonna change a lot of minds with at least my audience, which is probably pretty small right now. But everything you're doing out there, you're reaching a lot of people. So I appreciate the work you're doing.
Yeah, it's been an honor, Parker. It was great to chat with you, and I went down quite a few different rabbit holes, and hopefully it makes sense. But I'd be down to do it again, man. You are a great interviewer, and it was truly an honor.
Great, really appreciate it, and yeah, I think it's gonna be a fun episode when it comes out.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, that's all for today's show. I want to thank you so much for stopping by and watching, especially if you've made it all the way to this point. If you'd like to be notified when new episodes are going to be released, feel free to subscribe and make sure you hit the bell button as well. To learn more about today's guest, feel free to look in the description. You can also visit the podcast website, which is exploringhealthpodcast.com. That website will also be linked in the description. As always, likes, shares, comments are a huge help to me and to this channel and to the show. So any of that you can do, I would really appreciate. And again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.